Hello, my name is Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. Have you ever let your stubbornness come out? A few months ago, I spent 2 hours and 47 minutes on hold with customer service, and that's not an exaggeration. I watched the timer on my phone. 2 hours and 47 minutes. I was trying to get a bill sorted out, and the whole thing should have taken 10 minutes or less, but instead I found myself pacing around my house listening to the same horrible music on a loop that was broken up every few moments by a recorded voice that sarcastically said, with no irony at all, "Your call is important to us. Please continue to hold." I counted. They said that 62 times. After the first hour, I started talking back to that voice about how much my call actually mattered, trying to do anything to get some kind of response or relief. After the second hour, Trista said, "Just hang up, call him back later." And I told her with the full conviction of a man who has completely lost perspective, "I can't hang up now. I've come too far." Deep down, I knew my wife was right. I just couldn't bring myself to do it, because if I had hung up after 2 hours and 46 minutes, then I had done all of that waiting for nothing. So I pushed through, and at 2 hours and 47 minutes, this very kind woman answered the phone, and she was able to fix my problem in 4 minutes. Now, here's the stubbornness in my story. Every time that I was about to hang up, something in me held on. Not because I had proof that anybody was listening, not because the music was getting better, but because I chose, in the absence of any real evidence, to keep believing that somebody would eventually answer the phone and help me. I can't help but think that's exactly why Jesus told the story we're looking at today. He looks at his disciples, men who are about to face the kind of waiting that would feel like total abandonment, and he tells them a story. Not to entertain them, not to give them some theological framework to analyze. He told them a story to encourage them to keep on the phone and not hang up. One day, Jesus told his disciples a story to show that they should always pray and never give up. Now, Luke doesn't normally do this. Most of the time with parables, we're left to wrestle with the meaning ourselves. But right here on this parable, we find a sticky note that says, this is a story about persistent prayer. Don't quit. And if you've been a Christian for more than 15 minutes, you've heard sermons on prayer before, and you've been encouraged to pray without ceasing, don't give up. And while I believe that's important and I believe that's true, when we read the parable this way, I think we might miss a thing or two that the original listeners would have heard. Because it's not a gentle lesson in spiritual discipline. It's actually offensive, and it's dangerous. And it turns everything that we think we know about prayer upside down. So let's try to take a step back and get our bearings by looking at the world that Jesus is telling this parable in. Because the parable's not set in a vacuum. It's set in a specific social landscape. And I think if we miss the landscape, we miss the point of the parable. There was a judge in a certain city, he said, who never feared God nor cared about people. A widow of that city came to him repeatedly saying, "Give me justice in this dispute with my enemy." The judge ignored her for a while, but finally he said to himself, "I don't fear God or care about people, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice because she's wearing me out with her constant requests." In first century Palestine, widows occupied the lowest rung on the social ladder. In almost every legal and economic sense, they were considered a non-person. When her husband died, she lost her primary advocate, her legal representation, her financial security, her social standing, all in one event. She couldn't own property in most circumstances. She couldn't bring a legal case without a male representative to speak for her. She didn't have any sons old enough to plead her case. She has no political connections, no wealth to bribe with, no status to leverage. And while we're not told who her adversary is, it could have been a landlord, a creditor, a relative contesting an inheritance. But we know that they almost certainly have all the power, the status, the connections, the money. She's not just outmatched, she's in a different category altogether. The system was not designed with her in mind at all. And then we have a judge. And Jesus is really deliberate about who this man is. He's not a synagogue elder. He's not rooted in the Jewish legal tradition. He's not accountable to his community. I'm told there's actually a saying at that time that judges are just robbers in disguise. Justice wasn't blind, it was for sale. And the only way to get a hearing was to bribe the judge or to have a powerful person speak up for you. Twice, Jesus says this judge neither feared God nor cared about people. And his audience, when they heard those words, it was like an alarm going off. Fearing God's not just about personal virtue, it's the foundation of justice itself. And the phrase didn't care what people thought carried a strong sense of social contempt. In a culture built on honor and shame, this was a character flaw of the highest order. So Jesus puts the most powerless person in society in front of the most indifferent person in authority. The widow shows up and asks for justice. The judge says no. And so she comes back again and again and again. The word the judge eventually uses is a boxing term. Literally, he says that she's going to give me a black eye. And we know that he's not worried about her fists, but he's exhausted by her refusal to disappear. She wins not with force or status or wealth, but by refusing to stop. Now, my fear is that this is the point where so many of us misread the parable, and the misreading costs us everything. The point of the parable is not that God is the unjust judge. I need you to understand that. If you take anything away from what we're doing today, you need to understand that. Jesus is not saying God is reluctant, self-interested, and needed to be nagged into caring about you. That would be a terrifying message, and it would be a false one. What Jesus is doing here is using a specific kind of argument that Jewish rabbis called the lesser to the greater. If something is true in a worst case scenario, then how much more true can it be in a better case? We actually see Jesus doing this several times through the parables. So look at the contrast. The judge did not care about the widow. He saw her as an annoyance, a problem to be managed. And yet God doesn't see you as a problem. He sees you as a child. He calls you by name. He knows the very hairs on your head. The judge acts out of self-interest because justice is only given, not because it's right, because it's easier than dealing with this woman day after day after day after day. God acts out of love, not because your prayers inconvenience him, not because you've worn him down, but because love is his nature and your good is his desire. 1 John 4:8 doesn't say God acts lovingly, it says God is love. That's not a description of his behavior, that's a description of his being. The judge is indifferent, self-serving, worn down, limited. God is deeply loving, extravagantly giving, and already inclined towards you. If the widow got justice from this judge, the question isn't whether you'll get a response from God. The question is, do you trust him enough to work in his timing? Here's where I think we need to have an honest conversation about what prayer actually is. Because I think we have this mostly unspoken problem in how we come to understand prayer. Most of us have unconsciously reduced prayer to nothing more than a transaction. We bring our request, we wait for the answer, and if the answer comes, then prayer works. If the answer doesn't come, then prayer doesn't work and God doesn't care. We've turned prayer into some kind of cosmic vending machine. We insert our request, we select the option, and we wait for the product to drop. And if the product doesn't drop, we may shake the machine, we may try again, but eventually, if nothing comes out, we walk away thinking the machine is broken. We need to understand that prayer is not a vending machine. Prayer is a relationship. And relationships don't work that way. When you really love someone, you don't stop talking to them because they didn't give you what you wanted on the timeline that you expected. That's not love. That's manipulation. Love keeps talking. Love keeps showing up. Love stays at the table even when the conversation is hard and the silence is long and the answers don't come easy. God's not reluctant. He's not withholding your answer because you haven't been persuasive or frequent or sincere enough. Persistent prayer is about changing you. It keeps you oriented towards God instead of your own resources. It keeps you from making decisions based on your strength when your strength is insufficient, which, let's be honest, is most of the time. Persistent prayer keeps your heart connected to God's heart. And when you've been praying about something for months, for years, there's this desperation. There's a vulnerability. And that kind of prayer transforms the person doing the praying. Think about it like an athlete who's training. The goal of athletic training is not just to finish one lap or to finish one rep. The goal is to become someone who can keep going when the body wants to quit. Prayer works like that spiritually. It trains the soul to endure disappointment without abandoning God. I think this is the point where we need to sit in some real discomfort for a minute, because I know what's happening in the hearts and in the lives of some of the people watching today. Some of you stopped praying. Not all of you, but some of you have stopped praying. And I'm not talking about people who've had some kind of dramatic theological crisis and walked away from their faith. I'm talking about something far more subtle and far more common. Something that will never show up on the news or won't get printed in the bulletin. I'm talking about people who have just kind of drifted. Their prayers have gotten shorter, less frequent. And then one day you realize you haven't really prayed about anything in weeks, maybe months. You feel a little guilty about that, which is actually a good sign, because it means a part of you still believes in God, still believes in prayer. Maybe, though, you found yourself praying about marriage for years, and that marriage just keeps cycling through the same patterns and nothing changes. And so your prayers begin to get shorter. They get less specific. And now when you pray about it, it's kind of a vague spiritual shrug, because somewhere deep down you've decided that getting your hopes up and having them crushed is a specific kind of pain you just can't afford to feel one more time. Maybe you're praying about a diagnosis, or at least you were. You got news from a doctor that changed everything. And so you prayed hard and specific prayers, and then months go by. And the next doctor's visit doesn't come with good news. And so the prayers become more general. And now you just try not to think about it, because thinking about it means feeling the gap between what you asked for and what you've actually received. Maybe you're praying about a child. Maybe there's a relationship that's broken that seemed impossible when that child was small, when you would read to them at bedtime or push them in a swing and you prayed over them every single night. And now there's distance. And you've prayed about it, but recently, honestly, you begin to wonder, do those prayers even make it past the ceiling? Are they doing any good at all? I don't want you to try to defend the fact that you stopped. Jesus tells this story because he understands that we're often in the same situation as that widow. She had every single reason to stop. She has no leverage, no allies, no track record of success with this judge. By every measurable standard, she should have given up days, weeks, months, years ago. But she keeps going. And not because she's stubborn, not because she's naive. She keeps going because she believes that despite all evidence to the contrary, justice exists. And that somehow, somewhere, the gap between what was right and what was happening could be closed. That belief was her only weapon. And Jesus says it's enough. One of the hardest parts of persistent prayer is learning to stay in a relationship with God, the God that sometimes seems quiet. And I know all too well that God's silence is real, and I'm not about to pretend that it's not. There are seasons of prayer that feel like sending letters into a void. There are nights when I've poured my heart out and I've heard nothing back except the sound of my own breathing. But I want you to notice something in this parable. The judge's silence was indifference. He didn't care about the widow. Yet God's silence is never indifference. The same God who is called the defender of the widows in the book of Psalms, the same God that wept at Lazarus' tomb, the same God who is described as knowing everything about us and singing over us, is not silent because he doesn't care. He's working in ways that we can't see, in timelines that we don't comprehend, towards purposes that are better than our own. I'm going to try to say this gently. God's silent is not the verdict you fear it might be. Isaiah wrote to people who felt completely abandoned, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." And I used to read that passage and think that Isaiah put it in the wrong order. Shouldn't we learn to walk so we could run and then soar? But I've begun to learn that Isaiah was actually right. Sometimes the miracle isn't soaring. Sometimes faithfulness just looks like walking, putting one foot in front of the other, showing up to pray one more time when you're exhausted, when the silence hurt. That's the heart of this story that Jesus told. For a moment, I want you to try to picture the widow the night before she goes back to the courthouse. She's already been turned away time and time again. She knows what's going to happen in her heart when she walks through that door tomorrow morning. She knows the judge's expression, the dismissive, barely there wave of the hand that says you're invisible and your need doesn't matter. She knows how her body's going to feel standing in that room, asking one more time and one more time, receiving no help. She knows how she's going to feel on the walk home. She knows the specific exhaustion of it, the way it kind of sits on your chest like a stone. She doesn't have any money. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have a plan. The only thing that she has is belief, stubborn, possibly irrational belief that she deserves justice, that justice exists, and that the distance between those two facts can eventually be closed. So she gets up the next morning and she straightens her robe. She didn't have anywhere else to go, and she walks back to that courthouse. She doesn't get up in the morning because she feels helpful or hopeful. She doesn't get up because the circumstances have changed. She doesn't get up because her neighbors encouraged her, or a sermon inspired her, or a worship experience lifted her back up. The only reason that she gets up is because she decided at some point in the long and discouraging waiting that she was going to let her belief be more powerful than her despair. That's what faith looks like when it has nothing left but itself. And Jesus says that is exactly the faith that moves the heart of the Father. Not the polished, confident, everything is fine faith. Not the faith of the person who's never had to walk through dark valleys. The faith of the widow who's been through everything and who has nothing left, who's been turned away more times than she can count, and yet she still shows up. That's the faith that God is looking for. That's the faith God honors. And isn't that really how Jesus ends the parable? He just made the case that God is faithful, that God is not going to keep putting his people off, that the answer will come, and it will come quickly. And then right in the moment when you expect a big amen and the invitation for people to come forward while together we stand and sing, Jesus asks, well, when the Son of Man returns, how many will he find on the earth who have faith? That's not a gentle question. That's a gut punch. Jesus just told us that God is faithful, that he will answer, he will come through. And then he turns around and he looks at the crowd and he asks, but when I come back, Will I find people that actually believe that? He isn't asking if he's going to find church attendance or if he's going to find people who believe the right things in abstract or people who can articulate the correct doctrine or theology. He's not even looking for people who show up on Sundays and sing the songs. He's asking for something far more specific, far more searching. What he wants to know is, when he comes back, is he going to find people who are still knocking on the door of heaven? When everything in their circumstances is screaming, nobody's home, will there be people who have kept praying through the silence, through the delay, through the discouragement, through the well-meaning friends who told them to give it up? People who have kept showing up like the widow with nowhere else to go. People who continue to say, God, I still believe that you're here. I still believe that you're just. And I still believe that you will answer, and I'm not going to leave. The question that keeps me up at night, because I think it's the greatest danger to our faith, is not persecution, it's not moral failure, it's not false teaching. It's, have we given up on prayer? It's assuming that silence has meant rejection and deciding that God doesn't care about us. And slowly, gradually, we stop crying out, we stop expecting, we stop believing. And then Jesus returns. And is he going to find a church that has learned to live very comfortably without miracles? Or is he going to find a church that's still pounding their fists on the gates of heaven? Honestly, I know that the prayer of somebody who's given up, I know what that sounds like. It sounds like, God, I know you're probably not going to do anything about this, and I'm not really sure why I'm bringing it up again, but here it is, amen. It's short, it's flat, there's no expectation in it. It's a prayer that already has its bags filled with disappointment, hedged against hope, because hope hurts. And I know the prayer of somebody who still believes. It sounds like, God, I'm back. I know I was just here, and I know we've talked about this 100 times, but I'm here again because I have this belief that you are good, and you love me, and you can do this, and you care about me. And God, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here because I want to be with you. And I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, because I'm not giving up on you. Which one of those two prayers sounds more like your prayer life right now? If it's the first one, or really if you haven't been praying at all lately, I need you to hear that you can come back right now today, and God's not going to make you feel embarrassed about how long you were away from him. He's not even going to bring it up. He's not going to hold it over you. He's not going to make you earn your way back into his presence, because his presence isn't something you can earn. It's a gift given freely to every child who comes home. Today, the courtroom is open. The judge is on the bench, and he is nothing like the judge in the story. He's not ignoring you. He's not annoyed by you. He's listening, and he's waiting. And he's looking for one more thing. Not perfection, not achievement, not people who have it all figured out. He's looking for faith. Stubborn, persistent, no backup plan, show up one more time faith. Because that's what the children who love God do. They're not perfect. They just show up. They don't have it all figured out. They just show up. And they show up because they believe that they have been invited to the table. And they believe that the table where they take the bread and the cup, they believe that those symbols actually mean something in their life, that the God who they are praying to has already dedicated himself to loving them and caring about them through the act of Jesus Christ. And so we might not get an answer today, or next week, or next month, or next year, but we get something better. We get the opportunity to go over and over again into the presence of the one who invites us to the table. I hope you have a wonderful week. Never forget how deeply you're loved, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.